We were taught that forgiveness is a moral good, that to forgive is to rise above, that it means you're strong, mature, emotionally evolved, and that I think that's always right. It's always healing, it's always wise. But what if that's not always true though? What if forgiveness at the wrong time or for the wrong reasons can actually be a betrayal of self? What if letting go isn't always an act of courage, but sometimes it's like a quiet form of self-abandoning? Because let's be honest, there are times when we say, I forgive you, because we don't know how to say, I'm not ready. We let go, not because we've healed, but because we're afraid of holding on to our hurt, and it'll make us look more like we're bitter or unkind. And so we confuse peacekeeping with integrity. We perform forgiveness to get back to normal, even if that normal never felt mutual or honest. And in the process, we leave parts of ourselves behind. That's what this episode today is about. Not forgiveness as a moral checkbox, not forgiveness as a shortcut to spiritual superiority, but forgiveness as a moment of reckoning. Am I making peace, or am I disappearing again to make others comfortable? But let's slow it down just a little here and feel this together, shall we? Because many of us who identify as compassionate or kind-hearted or emotionally sensitive, we struggle with this more than we care to admit, right? We're the ones who say, it's okay, when it's not. We're the ones who brush things under the rug just to keep the peace, who try to take the high road but feel hollow inside afterwards. We're the ones who say, I understand, even when what happened really shattered us. And we do it because we're afraid of being called dramatic, afraid of being judged for being angry, afraid of seeming unforgiving or petty or stuck in the past. So instead of taking up space with our hurt, we disappear into grace. But here's the truth that not many have told us, right? Forgiveness without boundaries is not healing. It's really a form of erasing yourself. It's an undoing of yourself and a quiet dismissal of your own pain. And no matter how holy it looks on the outside, your body always knows the truth. You know, it's a kind of forgiveness that, I don't know, like it doesn't hit in the right place. It's a kind where you feel more pressure than peace, where you're feeling smaller instead of lighter. The kind that you offer not because you were ready, but because you thought you had to do it. Maybe someone hurt you deeply. And instead of accountability, you got advice. Be the bigger person, or don't let them rent space in your head, or just move on already, right? And maybe eventually you did. You smiled, you said, no worries, and you gave them grace. But inside you felt invisible, and your hurt went unspoken, and your boundaries got blurred, and your sense of safety dissolved into silence. And that's the thing. Sometimes what gets praised as forgiveness is just really our latest performance of being agreeable. So let's name this clearly. You don't owe forgiveness on someone else's timeline. Not to your partner, not to your parents, not to the friend who swears they didn't mean it, not even to your boss who's never really apologized, not even to the version of yourself that you're trying to forgive. Forgiveness, you see, is not a race. It's not proof of your emotional evolution. Forgiveness is not a signal that you're done hurting. Forgiveness, or true forgiveness, also includes you. And if what you're calling forgiveness is costing you your honesty, or your boundaries, or your safety, even your voice, then it's not peace. It's people-pleasing in disguise, and it will hollow you out. Now, there's another layer here that we have to talk about too. especially for those who are raised to believe that forgiveness is always the right thing to do, no matter the cost. Because when you grow up in environments that are religious, or even cultural or family-based, where forgiveness is weaponized as the marker of your worthiness, you learn to forgive not as a gift that you're ready to offer, but as a requirement to keep your place in the group. And you forgive basically to survive. And in doing so, you slowly learn to ignore your gut, and you mistrust your pain. You silence your anger. You smile when you really want to scream. And the longer you do that, the more disoriented you become inside your own skin. See, forgiveness becomes like a form of control, of self-gaslighting, of bypassing the messiness of being hurt, because being nice is easier than being real. But here's probably what no one told you. You don't have to abandon yourself to be a good person. You don't have to pretend that you're over it. You don't have to prove that you're above it. You don't have to forgive before you're even finished grieving. Pause there, would you? Because maybe right now you're thinking of someone that you forgave a little too soon. Perhaps you told yourself that you were done, that you'd let it go, that you didn't want to carry it anymore. But your body remembered, and your dreams remembered, and your nervous system remembered. And every time that you saw their name, or heard their voice, or ran into them at the grocery store, a part of you braced, or tensed, or shut down. See, that's not failure, that's wisdom. That's your body saying, we're not ready. We weren't ready, and we still need to be seen. Now, let's sit with this just for a moment, shall we? What if forgiveness isn't the destination, but instead it's a process that includes the truth of your hurt? Not the neat version, not the socially accepted version, not the watered down inspirational quote version per se, but the raw truth, the part that you're really scared to name. The part that says, I needed more from you, or you broke something in me, or I'm still bleeding and I don't know how to stop. That kind of honesty is where real forgiveness, I think, begins, not where it ends. Because real forgiveness is rooted in integrity. And integrity means that you don't pretend to be further along than you actually are. It means that you don't abandon what's real just so that you can gain approval or closure or the illusion even of healing. Let's say this as clearly as we can here. You don't have to forgive someone to be free. Sometimes what frees you isn't forgiveness. It might be distance or truth or boundaries. It's no longer needing them to understand you. And sometimes it's also letting yourself finally feel the anger that you weren't allowed to have or express. Because that anger it's not a sign of regression. It's a signal that your dignity is waking back up again. See, forgiveness doesn't mean that you let them back in. It doesn't mean that you silence your story. It doesn't mean that you're erasing the consequences. It means that you're reclaiming your right to exist as someone who was hurt and who doesn't have to really justify or rush their recovery to make others comfortable. See, forgiveness without justice is spiritual gaslighting. Forgiveness without boundaries is more like emotionally surrendering. And if the person who hurt you expects your forgiveness without really owning their impact, they're not looking for healing. They're just wanting your silence. There's a phrase I don't think we hear often enough, and that is, I'm not ready to forgive, and that's okay. That's not bitterness. That's not revenge. That's not being stuck. It's just honest truth. And truth is really the foundation of real healing. Because here's the thing. Forgiveness is not a checkbox on your moral resume. It's not a test of your goodness. It's a deeply personal process that can only come from within. Sometimes choosing not to forgive, at least not yet, is actually the most loving thing that you can do for yourself. So let's talk a little bit about this spiritual bypassing for a moment. Because I think in so many healing spaces, like whether it's religious or therapeutic, even self-help, letting go is the only way forward, right? That staying angry makes you weak or unenlightened. But what if your anger is really a compass? And grief, what if that's your teacher? What if your unwillingness or just get over it is actually the deepest self of you crying out for respect? See, forgiveness should never be used as a silencing tactic. And if it is, the world around you is pushing you to let go, even while you're still bleeding. The problem isn't your reluctance, it's the world's discomfort with your truth. So let me say this with love. You are allowed to take your time. You're allowed to sit with the hurt and to tend to your wound and to name what's been broken without needing to rush toward peace. Because forgiveness is not just about releasing someone else. Forgiveness is also about returning to yourself, to your sense of wholeness, to the boundaries that you've placed, to the sacred no that you have access to the part of you that says, I matter, and what happens to me matters. That's the groundwork of authentic forgiveness. Not the kind that just erases the past, but it's the kind that honors self that has lived through it. Maybe no one has ever told you this before, so let me be the one to tell you this. You don't need to perform forgiveness to earn love. You don't need to let go before you're ready, just to prove that you're over it. And you don't have to soften what happened so you can look graceful. Forgiveness comes when it comes. And it should feel more like integration and not erasing yourself. It should feel like your voice returning, like your spine straightening and your heart saying, I choose peace, but not at the cost of my truth. So how do we know? How do we know if we are forgiving because we're actually ready, or if we're just trying to feel ready, or because we think we have to? The answer is always it kind of lies in your body, not our normal ideas, and not the quotes on Instagram. Maybe not even what your therapist says you'll eventually need to do. But it really lies in your body, I think, in your nervous system, in that place within that feels a peace or feels constricted and afraid. See, if your body tightens when you're thinking of the person who hurt you, if you find your jaw clenching and your breath shortens and your gut kind of drops, it may not be time. Not because you're petty or holding a grudge, but because your body isn't quite finished telling its truth. And you can't fast forward trust. You can't manufacture readiness. Real forgiveness, it often comes quietly. Not with a social media announcement, not with a performative, oh, I've let it go, but with this subtle shift in your system that says, I no longer need to carry this pain to protect myself anymore. That's, I think, when you know you've crossed the threshold. That's when forgiveness becomes possible. Not as a duty, but more so as a byproduct of healing. But until then, you are allowed to wait. And you're allowed to feel it all. You're allowed to not be there quite yet. There's still another layer that we rarely talk about, I think, and that is forgiveness without reconciliation. See, you can forgive someone and never speak to them again. You can forgive them and still hold them accountable. And you can forgive them without ever returning to the same dynamic that broke you. Because forgiveness is not a hall pass. Forgiveness is not a way of saying, oh, it didn't matter. Forgiveness is really a way of saying, It mattered, and it mattered deeply, but I refuse to let this harden me forever. And sometimes your decision to walk away is the very act that opens up the space for forgiveness on your terms. So let's also name this. Some people don't deserve a second chance. And that doesn't mean you're bitter. It just means that you're discerning. See, you're allowed to choose your peace over someone else's comfort. You're allowed to protect your heart without feeling guilty. You're allowed to say, I wish you well, but not in my space. And if someone calls you unforgiving because of that, that's not your burden to carry. See, letting go of resentment doesn't mean that you're relinquishing wisdom. It means that you stop letting their choices dictate what your worth is. See, what we're doing here is we're reclaiming forgiveness from the industry of shame, from the voices, the internal and external voices that tell us that we're bad or we're small if we can't find it in our hearts to move on. But let's be real about this. Forgiveness that's coerced is not forgiveness. That's just forced performance. And it's often just another way of saying that it's just another way we gaslight ourselves into this spiritual bypassing. True forgiveness does not require you to forget. It doesn't demand amnesia. It asks instead for your integration. And it asks you to metabolize your experience so that it doesn't control you. But it also doesn't disappear either. And here's probably the most freeing part. You can be healing without having forgiven yet. That's not contradictory. That's just honesty there. Because healing is not a single event. It's kind of like a spiral. You'll revisit the same wound at deeper levels, and you'll feel the fresh anger maybe months after you thought you've moved on. You may bump into the old grief when you least expect it. And that doesn't mean that you're regressing. It means that your body just wasn't ready to heal. Your body's ready to heal in a newer way. And you need just compassion to move through that process. So let's pause with this. You can forgive yourself for not forgiving yet. That's where I think so many of us get stuck, not in resentment of others, but more so in resentment of ourselves for not being able to let go. But maybe the truth is this. You don't need to let go. You need to be held. Held in the honesty of your process. Held in the gravity of what happened. Held in the knowing that there is no timeline for something this sacred. See, forgiveness, when it comes, it should feel like freedom. And if it feels like self-abandonment, it's not time yet. And that's okay. See, when we talk about forgiveness as a virtue, we forget something essential, and that is virtues aren't virtues when they come at the cost of truth. They're only virtues when they're chosen from a place of wholeness. And forgiveness is included in that. It has to emerge from your center, not from coercion or guilt or this desperate need to be good or seen as good. Otherwise, it becomes yet another betrayal. This time, you're just self-inflicting it. So what is real forgiveness? It's not an escape hatch. It's not a shortcut to healing. It's not a badge that you wear to prove how spiritually evolved you are. Forgiveness is a grounded decision that really says, I faced my pain, I felt its weight, and now I'm choosing to release what no longer is serving me. Not because it didn't matter, but because I matter. This is where integrity and intimacy return as our compass. Integrity says, I won't say that I've let go when I haven't. And I won't force virtue to mask my pain. I'm not going to perform peace so that I can avoid conflict with myself. And intimacy says, I want to live from an open heart, but I can't do that by skipping steps. I need to feel it all without being rushed or ashamed or pushed to transcend my humanity. Because intimacy isn't how we relate to others. It's really how deeply we allow ourselves to be known, especially in our messiness, especially in our pain, and when forgiveness even feels like the one thing that we can't quite give yet. Now let's talk a little bit about forgiving yourself. This is probably one of the hardest things that we do, because the person who hurt us most sometimes is ourselves. Not because we meant to, but because we're surviving, because we didn't really know better, because repeating what was modeled to us is all we know, and because we thought we had to tolerate what harmed us so that we can feel loved. And when the fog clears, we sometimes look back with shame, thinking, how could I have let this happen? Or why didn't I leave sooner? Or what's wrong with me? But those questions don't lead to healing. Those questions lead to rejecting yourself. The real questions sound more like this. I wonder what I was afraid of. Or what was I really hoping for? Or what part of me needed love so badly that I thought that this was the way? These questions lead us to where compassion begins. That's where forgiveness begins, not as absolution as much as you're reparenting yourself. You don't have to excuse your heart and your past. You can actually just try understanding it. You can hold the younger version who didn't quite know how to fight or leave or even know how to say no yet. And here's the irony. The more honest we are about our wounds, the easier it becomes to forgive others. Not because we're minimizing what they did, but because we stop projecting onto them our hope that they'll make it right. We stop waiting for apologies that may never come. We stop rehearsing the fantasy where they finally understand. Instead, we grieve and we accept and we reclaim our power. And in that reclamation, forgiveness becomes this form of liberation, not capitulation. It becomes really a way of saying, this pain shaped me, yes, but this pain does not own me. So where does this leave us? It kind of gives us a sense of clarity, doesn't it? That forgiveness is not weakness, but it's also not owed. That forgiveness can be healing, but only when it's real. And that sometimes the most radical act of love isn't letting someone off the hook. It's letting yourself off the hook for not being ready to. Maybe the most important words I think in this entire conversation are these. You get to decide. You get to decide when and how and even whether. See, you're not a lesser person for taking your time. You're not failing at growth if you're still angry. You're not morally inferior because you haven't found your closure. You're a human with layers and with stories and with scars. And you're allowed to be exactly where you are. See, forgiveness, when it comes, should not ask you to disappear. It should not feel like self-betrayal. It should really feel like a returning to yourself, a return to your center, to your truth, to your softness after the armor is no longer needed. Until then, we wait and we heal and we hold space for being hurt and wanting to be open again someday. Because this is not a race to forgiveness. It's just walking back to yourself. And that journey is sacred. I hope this has served you well. Let me know in the comments how it landed for you. See you in the next episode.